2 days before his wedding, former Navy SEAL Graham Calloway found a wounded German shepherd on a snowy Montana road. The dog's name was Ranger, and he was not running from the cold. He was trying to get back to something. At first, Graham thought he had saved a lost animal before starting a new life with the woman he loved. But Ranger kept reacting to the people and papers surrounding the wedding, as if an old promise was buried beneath the snow. What Graham uncovered was not just betrayal, but a healing project built on stolen trust and wounded lives. Sometimes, God sends the warning gently, through a dog, a road, and a truth we are not ready to face. Stay with this story, and if it moves your heart, please like, subscribe, and help this channel reach 1,000 subscribers so we can keep writing stories like this. The lake outside Whitefish had frozen into a sheet of pale blue glass. By late afternoon, sunlight spilled across the ice in long golden lines, catching on the snowbanks beside the road and turning every pine branch into something almost ceremonial. The whole town looked as if it had dressed itself for Graham Calloway's wedding before Graham had found the courage to do the same. He stood alone on the porch of the lodge, one hand wrapped around a paper cup of black coffee that had gone cold 10 minutes ago. Across the driveway, workers carried white chairs into the reception hall. A florist in a wool hat argued gently with a deliveryman about where the evergreen arches should go. Inside, someone laughed. Someone else tested the sound system, and a woman's voice came through the speakers for half a second before cutting out. Everything was moving forward. That was the part that unsettled him. Graham was 51, tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of stillness people often mistook for calm. His hair, brown once, had gone ash-gray at the temples and along the front, where the Montana wind liked to lift it. A faint bend in the bridge of his nose gave his face a harder history than he usually spoke about. His eyes were a cold blue-gray, not unfriendly, but watchful, in a way that made small talk die quickly around him. He had spent years learning how to read a doorway, a rooftop, a man's hands, the silence before something went wrong. Marriage, he was discovering, asked for a different kind of courage. It asked a man to stop scanning every room for exits and believe there might be a place he did not have to escape from. Vivian Mercer said that was exactly what love was. "You're doing it again," she had told him that morning, smoothing one hand over the sleeve of his flannel shirt, as if brushing dust from a display case. "Looking for danger where there isn't any." She had smiled when she said it. Vivian always knew how to make a correction sound like tenderness. She was 43, elegant without seeming to try, her caramel brown hair falling in soft waves against the cream collar of her coat. She smelled faintly of vanilla and cedar, a warm scent that somehow matched the polished brochures stacked in her office and the pale leather folders she carried from meeting to meeting. Graham had wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe the knot in his chest was only old training, old loss, old weather inside the body. He wanted to believe that in 2 days he would stand beside Vivian in front of the lake and step into a life where people did not leave in helicopters, or coffins, or the middle of the night without explanation. The wedding was not the only thing coming. After the ceremony, Vivian planned to introduce Mercer Renewal Lodge to a room full of donors, veterans advocates, and local business owners. A retreat center, she called it. A place for healing. A place where men and women who had carried too much for too long could come back to themselves. She wanted Graham to speak. Not long, she had promised. Just enough to let people see what hope looked like when it had a face. The phrase had stayed with him all day. A face. Not a man. Not a whole life. A face. He took a slow breath, reached into his coat pocket, and closed his fingers around the small brass compass he carried everywhere. It had belonged to his father, long before it belonged to him. The glass was scratched. The needle still worked. When Graham was younger, he had thought direction was the same thing as certainty. Now he knew better. His phone buzzed. "Vivian, final fitting went beautifully. Don't forget to pick up the printed donor cards from the shop before you come back. Love you." Graham stared at the message until the screen dimmed. "Love you." He typed back, "On my way." The print shop sat on the far side of town, past the last row of coffee houses and ski rentals, where the road began to climb toward the darker timber. By then, the sky had turned a soft winter lavender. Snow moved lightly across the windshield. Not quite a storm, not quite harmless. Graham drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting near the heater vent. His old waxed canvas jacket lay folded on the passenger seat beside a box of donor cards tied with white string. His wedding vows were tucked in the glove compartment, written in pencil because ink had felt too permanent when he first began. Halfway down the mountain road, he saw the truck. It came around the bend too fast. A dark pickup with no front plate, tires spitting snow and gravel. Graham eased right, watching it pass. For one brief second, through the side window, he caught the driver's profile. Low cap, jaw tight, both hands locked high on the wheel. Then the truck was gone. A shape moved near the ditch. Graham hit the brakes before the thought fully formed. At first, it looked like a shadow torn loose from the trees. Then, it staggered into the gray light, a German shepherd, large, yellow-black, sable coat, dark along the back like a weathered cloak. One front leg lifted awkwardly. Its ears were up, though the left one had a small tear along the edge. Snow clung to its muzzle, where a few silver hairs showed against the black mask of its face. The dog did not run toward him. It did not run away either. It stood in the road, trembling but upright, amber eyes fixed on Graham's truck, with an intelligence that made the cold feel suddenly sharper. "Easy," Graham murmured, though the window was still closed. He put the truck in park and stepped out slowly. The air bit through his shirt before he reached for his jacket. He did not approach straight on. He angled his body, lowered his shoulders, let his hands hang visible at his sides. The dog watched every movement. "Not here to hurt you," Graham said. Its nose twitched. Its body remained rigid. A leather collar hung loose around its neck, old and darkened by weather. Something metallic flashed beneath the fur. Graham crouched several feet away. The shepherd shifted its weight and nearly buckled. That was what decided him. Not the collar. Not the strange truck. Not the look in the dog's eyes. The limp. A creature in pain could still choose pride. But pain had a way of telling the truth faster than any mouth. Graham removed one glove and held out the back of his hand. The dog did not sniff it at first. It looked past him, down the road where the pickup had vanished, then back toward the forest. Its chest moved with short, controlled breaths. Not panic, restraint. "You've been trained," Graham whispered. The dog's eyes returned to him. After a long moment, it stepped forward once. Then again. When its nose touched Graham's knuckles, something inside the man loosened so unexpectedly that he almost looked away. He had been touched by handshakes all week, congratulated, clapped on the shoulder, arranged into photographs. None of it had felt as honest as that brief, cautious contact from a half-frozen dog deciding whether a stranger could be trusted. The tag on the collar was scratched nearly smooth, but the name remained. Ranger. "Well, Ranger," Graham said softly. "Let's get you out of the road." He opened the rear door of the truck and laid his canvas jacket across the seat. Ranger hesitated, ears shifting. Graham did not pull him. He waited. After a few seconds, the shepherd gathered himself and climbed in with a small, controlled sound that was not quite a whine. Graham closed the door gently. He did not drive back to the lodge. Instead, he turned toward Harlan Price's garage. Harlan's place sat below the main road, a squat building with a red tow truck parked outside and a hand-painted sign that had survived at least 20 winters. Warm yellow light spilled through the windows. The smell of oil, rubber, and burnt coffee met Graham before Harlan did. The older man came out, wiping his hands on a rag. He was broad through the middle, red-faced from the cold, gray beard rough along his jaw. His Navy work jacket had Harlan stitched over one pocket, though most people in town would have known him without the label. "You look like a man bringing trouble," Harlan said. "Found him on North Fork Road." Harlan looked past him into the truck. The humor left his face. "Well," he said quietly, "that ain't trouble. That's somebody's dog." Inside the garage, Ranger allowed Harlan to examine the cut near his front leg, but kept his eyes on Graham the entire time. Harlan worked carefully, speaking in low, plain words, the way practical men spoke when they were trying not to admit they cared. Vivian arrived 20 minutes later in her camel coat and cream gloves, carrying a folded blanket from the lodge. "Oh, Graham," she said, and her face softened beautifully. "You poor thing." For a moment, Graham could almost feel the life he was trying to enter. A warm garage, a rescued dog, a woman kind enough to bring a blanket without being asked. Vivian knelt, but Ranger did not move toward her. He simply watched. "He's scared," she said, placing the blanket beside him rather than over him. "We should call the shelter before tonight. They'll know what to do." "Maybe," Graham said. Her eyes flicked to him. "The wedding is in 2 days. You don't need another responsibility right now." It was reasonable. That was what made it hard to argue with. Harlan bent closer to Ranger's collar. "Name's Ranger," he said. "Old leather. Good make. Somebody cared once." As if hearing the words, Ranger stood. Not quickly, not dramatically, but with purpose. He moved past Vivian, past Harlan, and crossed the garage to Graham's truck. The rear passenger door was still open. On the front seat sat the white box of donor cards Vivian had asked him to pick up, along with one of her pale leather folders. Ranger stopped beside the truck and placed himself between Graham and the open door. The garage went quiet. Vivian gave a small laugh. "Maybe he likes your jacket." But Ranger was not looking at the jacket. He was staring at the folder. Graham felt the old stillness come over him. Not fear. Not yet. Something before fear. The body noticing what the mind has not been given permission to know. Harlan scratched gently along the inside of Ranger's collar, checking where the leather had bunched and hardened from age. His thumb paused. "Hold on," he muttered. He turned the collar toward the light. A small patch of leather had been sewn over the inner band, clumsier than the rest. Harlan took a pocket knife from his workbench and looked at Graham. Graham nodded once. The blade slid under the patch. From beneath it, Harlan pulled a narrow strip of folded paper, damp at the edges, the ink blurred but not gone. He unfolded it carefully on the hood of the tow truck. 3 words remained readable. "Silver Pine Recovery Cabin." Vivian said nothing. Ranger stood beside Graham, amber eyes lifted, his body still blocking the open truck door like a living question. And for the first time that week, Graham stopped trying to convince himself that everything was fine. Graham did not sleep much that night. Ranger stayed near the bedroom door, not on the bed, not begging for comfort, but stationed there as if some old rule still lived inside him. Whenever the wind pressed against the windows, his ears lifted. Whenever Graham shifted under the blanket, the dog glanced back once, then settled again. Around 3 in the morning, Graham woke with his hand clenched around the brass compass on the nightstand. For a few seconds, he was not in Montana. He was somewhere hotter, darker, louder. Then Ranger rose without a sound and crossed the room. The shepherd did not jump, bark, or lick his face. He simply placed his head beside Graham's boots on the floor and stood there, breathing slow, steady, present. Graham stared at him through the dim blue light. "You knew somebody who needed that," he whispered. Ranger's amber eyes held his for a moment, then lowered. By morning, the world outside had turned clean and bright, the kind of winter beauty that could make danger look harmless. Vivian called twice before breakfast. Graham let both calls go to voicemail. He did not want to explain Silver Pine over the phone. Not yet. Not when he did not understand it himself. At Harlan's garage, the old mechanic studied the damp strip of paper again under a desk lamp. "Silver Pine Recovery Cabin," Harlan read, his voice lower than usual. "Haven't heard that name in a while." "You know it?" Harlan leaned back in his chair, the springs complaining beneath him. "Used to. Man named Owen Kittredge ran small weekends up there. Veterans mostly. No cameras, no speeches, no miracle talk. Just coffee, firewood, fishing if the lake held. My brother went twice before he passed. The way he said before he passed closed the room around them. Graham waited. Harlan rubbed a thumb along the edge of the paper. Owen wasn't polished. Didn't have Vivian's kind of shine. But men trusted him because he didn't try to turn pain into a brochure. That sentence stayed with Graham longer than it should have. They drove to Silver Pine in Harlan's red tow truck, with Ranger in the back seat standing instead of lying down, nose lifted toward the vents, as if the road itself had begun speaking to him. The cabin sat beyond a narrow forest track, half hidden among lodgepole pines heavy with snow. It was smaller than Graham expected. Weathered logs, a stone chimney, a porch sagging slightly on one side. Ranger went still, not alert the way he had been near Vivian's folder, not defensive, recognizing. When Graham opened the truck door, Ranger stepped down carefully and limped toward the porch. At the bottom step, he paused beside a dented metal bowl half buried in snow. He lowered his nose to it and exhaled once, a long sound that did not belong to a trained command or an animal instinct. It sounded like grief. Graham felt something tighten behind his ribs. Harlan looked away first. That was his place, then. Inside, the cabin smelled of cold wood, dust, and old smoke. A few chairs circled a black iron stove. On one wall hung faded photographs, men and women standing by the lake in winter coats, some smiling, some simply present. In one photo, Owen Kittredge stood with one hand resting on Ranger's head. Owen was lean, gray-haired, and unsmiling in the way some men were, when a smile felt like too much performance. But his hand on Ranger was gentle. Graham removed the photo from the wall and turned it toward the dog. Ranger stepped closer and touched his nose to the glass. For a moment, Graham forgot the wedding, the donor cards, the strange truck. He saw only a dog finding proof that the life he remembered had been real. Then his eyes shifted to the frame. The dust line around it was uneven. Graham looked at the wall again. 3 other rectangular patches showed where frames had recently been removed. He crouched near the floor. Snowmelt marked the boards by the back door. Not old. Not from months ago. Harlan! The mechanic came over. Graham pointed to the lock plate. This was changed recently. Harlan squinted. You sure? Wood around the screws is fresh. Door's old. Hardware isn't. The air in the cabin changed. Graham did not touch anything else. He took out his phone and photographed the lock, the floor, the missing frames, the wet marks, the tire impressions, visible through the back window, near a small storage shed. Ranger moved to a low cabinet beside the stove and nosed at it once. Graham almost told him to leave it. Then he saw the cabinet door was already slightly open, as if someone had searched it in a hurry. He pulled on gloves before touching the handle. Inside were old fire starters, a rusted lantern, and a folded wool blanket pushed hard against the back. Embroidered in one corner were 2 letters, O.K. Owen Kittredge. Beneath the blanket, Graham found a thin notebook wrapped in wax paper. The first pages were ordinary. Supply lists, names of volunteers, notes about who preferred not to talk in groups, who needed rides, who should not be seated near the door. It was not a dramatic record. That made it feel more real. Halfway through, the handwriting changed. Shorter, tighter. Do not release contact list without written consent. Mercer wants transfer language softened. Mason says donors need survivor access. Oh. Graham read the last phrase twice. Survivor access. He felt Ranger press against his knee, not pushing, not warning, simply there. Harlan's jaw hardened. That sound right to you? No, Graham said. It sounds like someone selling a locked door to people still trying to feel safe. Outside, an engine approached. Both men turned. A tan sheriff's department SUV rolled up behind the tow truck. The driver stepped out into the snow, a younger man in a brown winter deputy jacket, careful-eyed, clean-shaven, with a small scar under his chin. He did not rush toward them. He scanned the cabin, the tire marks, the open back shed, then Graham's hands. "Graham Calloway?" he asked. "Yes." "Deputy Cole Renner," Harlan called about the dog and a possible abandoned animal case. His gaze moved to Ranger, then to the cabin door. "Looks like this got bigger." Graham held up his phone. "We documented," before touching much. Cole nodded once, approving but cautious. "Good. Then let's slow this down before it turns into a mess nobody can use." That was exactly the kind of sentence Graham respected. As Cole began photographing the exterior, Ranger returned to the porch and sat beside the buried metal bowl. Snow dusted his ears. His eyes stayed on the cabin, but his body had softened, as if some part of him had made it home and found home wounded. Graham looked down at the notebook in his gloved hand. On the last page, below several crossed-out lines, one name remained clear. Quote, Vivian Mercer. He closed the notebook carefully, and for the first time since finding Ranger in the road, Graham understood the dog had not brought him to a secret. He had brought him back to a promise someone else had failed to keep. Graham did not take the notebook to Vivian. That was the first decision that felt like his own in days. He sat in his truck outside the closed library, Ranger resting in the back seat with his injured paw stretched carefully forward. Snow slid from the roof in soft sheets. Across the street, the wedding boutique glowed warmly, its front window filled with white fabric and gold lettering. 2 days ago, that window had felt like a promise. Now it looked like a display. Graham photographed the pages from Owen's notebook again, this time with better light. Contact list, transfer language, survivor access. The words were not proof of a crime, but they were proof of a direction. A compass needle did not tell the whole journey. It only showed which way a man had stopped facing. He called Dr. Leona Briggs. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice calm, low, awake, in the way therapists seemed to be, even when they were tired. "Graham," she said. "This is early. I need to ask you about Mercer Renewal Lodge." There was a pause, just long enough to matter. "Then you should come by." Her office sat above a pharmacy on Central Avenue, far from the polished timber and lake views Vivian preferred. Leona Briggs met him at the door in a dark teal sweater, silver threaded through her black bob, copper-framed glasses resting low on her nose. Nothing about her was dramatic. That made Graham trust her more. Ranger stepped inside slowly. Leona looked at him, then at Graham. "He chose to come in behind you, not ahead," she said. "That means something?" "It means he's watching your nervous system more than the room." Graham did not know what to do with that, so he handed her the notebook photos. Leona read in silence. The longer she read, the less expression she allowed herself. "I was invited to advise Vivian's project," she said at last. I declined. "Why?" "Because healing work requires consent before story, safety before exposure, privacy before inspiration. Comma Newman. Comma Newman." She tapped the phone screen where Owen had written survivor access. Comma Newman. Anyone who uses language like this around trauma has already started thinking of people as material. Graham looked toward the window. "Vivian says the lodge can help veterans who don't trust clinics." "It might," Leona said, "if it had licensed staff, clear crisis protocols, no pressure to testify on camera, and transparent funding. Retreats are not the enemy. Promising transformation while selling someone's pain is." The words landed quietly, but they landed deep. Graham remembered Vivian's hand on his sleeve. "You're looking for danger where there isn't any." He had heard comfort in it then. Now he heard the second message underneath. "Your instincts are the problem." When he left Leona's office, Vivian was waiting beside his truck. She looked beautiful against the snow, cream coat buttoned neatly, caramel hair tucked into her collar. In one hand, she held a paper bag from the bakery. In the other, Ranger's folded blanket. "I thought you might forget breakfast," she said. For a moment, he wanted to let the morning become simple. A woman who brought food. A dog being cared for. A wedding still possible if nobody asked the wrong question. Vivian looked through the window at Ranger and smiled gently. How is our stray hero? Our? Her smile held. You know what I mean. Ranger lifted his head but did not move. Graham took the bag. I went to Silver Pine. The softness in Vivian's face did not disappear. It rearranged. Why would you do that? Ranger knew the place. Graham. She sighed, not angry, almost sad. This is exactly what worries me. You find a wounded animal, an old cabin, a few strange notes, and your mind starts building a threat map. He said nothing. She touched his arm, lightly, perfectly. I love the part of you that protects people, she said. But I don't want your past to protect you out of a future. It was a beautiful sentence. That was why it hurt. Before Graham could answer, a black SUV pulled into the lot. Mason Vale stepped out, as if the cold had been arranged for him. Charcoal coat, dark gloves, polished boots, a scarf too expensive for the town. His smile arrived before he did. There he is, Mason called. The man of the week. Ranger stood inside the truck. Mason reached Graham and placed a hand on his shoulder. We need you strong tomorrow night. Donors don't just give to programs. They give to proof. Ranger's growl was low enough that only Graham heard it. Mason glanced at the dog, then removed his hand with a laugh. Still keeping the rescue? For now, Graham said. Vivian's eyes flickered between them. Mason, Graham's had a strange morning. Happens before weddings. Mason leaned closer, lowering his voice. Just remember, brother, people don't donate to facts. They donate to stories. Graham felt the phrase slide into place beside Owen's handwriting. Survivor access. He watched Mason's clean hand, the same hand that had rested too easily on his shoulder, slip back into a black leather glove. Later that afternoon, Harlan gave Graham a name. Tessa Monroe. She's a reporter, Harlan said over the phone. Not the kind who chases ambulances. The kind who reads tax filings until somebody sweats. Tessa agreed to meet behind the old courthouse, where the snow had been plowed into gray walls along the curb. She was in her early 50s, sharp-eyed, her gray blonde hair tucked under a wool cap, a recorder already in one hand, and doubt already in her face. I don't publish feelings, she said after Graham explained. I publish documents. Good, Graham said. I'm not asking you to believe me. That seemed to interest her more than any emotional appeal could have. He gave her copies of the notebook pages, the donor cards, the draft consent form Vivian wanted him to sign, and the photos from Silver Pine. Tessa looked through them without speaking. At last, she said, if Mercer used your service record or personal story and donor materials before signed consent, that's not a misunderstanding. That's leverage. Ranger sat at Graham's side, quiet in the falling light. Graham looked across the courthouse square toward the lodge road, where wedding guests would soon begin arriving. For the first time, he understood that the question was no longer whether Vivian had lied. The question was how many people her version of the truth had already reached. Tessa Monroe did not call until the next morning. By then, Graham had already walked Ranger twice around the frozen edge of town, not because the dog needed it, but because Graham did. The air was bright and hard. Each breath felt like something scraped clean inside his chest. When his phone rang, he stopped beside a row of snow-covered mailboxes. I found your name, Tessa said. Graham closed his eyes. In donor materials? In 3 versions. One says, you are an honorary co-founder. One says, your service history inspired the program model. The third includes a quote about love, giving you a second life. I never said that. I figured. Ranger looked up at him, ears shifting toward the sound of Tessa's voice. There's more, Tessa continued. The consent packet Vivian gave you yesterday? It isn't an introduction. It's a cleanup document. If you sign it now, it makes what they already sent look authorized. Graham looked across the street at the wedding lodge, where workers were unloading white flowers from a van. "Send me everything," he said. "I will. But Graham, this stops being personal now." That was the line that stayed with him. He had thought betrayal would arrive like heat, rage, noise. A door slammed hard enough to shake glass. Instead, it arrived as a PDF in his inbox. Vivian's language was everywhere. Hope, renewal, courage, a warrior's return to love. Graham read his own life summarized in polished sentences by people who had never sat beside him at 3 in the morning when a car backfired and his whole body forgot what year it was. Then came the photographs. Tessa had attached images from a wellness conference in Denver. Vivian and Mason stood beside a banner for private trauma retreats. In one photo, Mason's hand rested at Vivian's lower back. In another, Vivian laughed up at him, with a softness Graham had once believed was reserved for him. He did not throw the phone. He did not curse. He sat in his truck with both hands on the steering wheel, while the heater blew warm air against a body that had gone cold. Ranger climbed from the back seat into the front without invitation. He was too large for the space, all sable fur and careful weight, but he settled with his head on Graham's thigh. That broke something smaller and deeper than anger. Graham touched the torn edge of Ranger's left ear. "I was trying so hard not to be suspicious," he whispered. Ranger closed his eyes, as if suspicion had never been the sin. Later, Doctor. Leona met him in her office after canceling a lunch break she probably needed. Graham showed her the donor materials, the photos. He expected advice about Vivian. Instead, Leona asked him to read the brochure headline aloud. "From combat survival to emotional rebirth," Graham said, and hated the taste of it. Leona folded her hands around a mug of tea. "That is not your voice. No. And yet it uses your wound to sell certainty." Graham looked at the floor. "She told me I was healing." "Maybe part of you was," Leona said gently. "But healing does not require you to become proof for someone else's business." The words did not comfort him. They gave shape to the injury. By late afternoon, Tessa had found a witness. Maribel Shaw agreed to meet at a diner outside town, far from the lodge and its polished windows. She was 50, broad-shouldered, with cropped dark hair threaded in silver, and a black paracord bracelet wrapped around one wrist. She sat with her back to the wall, and her eyes on the door, until Graham introduced Ranger. Only then did her face soften. "He looks like he knows when people are lying to themselves," she said. "Sometimes," Graham answered. Maribel had attended a trial weekend, sponsored by Mason's company 6 months earlier. She had been told it was a private recovery workshop for former service members and emergency responders. No pressure, no cameras, unless she agreed. "But cameras came out after dinner," she said. "They asked us to share the moment we broke." Exact words. The moment we broke. Tessa's recorder sat on the table between them, red light blinking. Maribel looked at it, then forced herself to continue. "I told them no." Mason said, "Authenticity helped donors understand impact." Vivian said, "My courage could open doors for others." They made refusal feel selfish. Graham felt his throat tighten. "What happened after?" "I left before sunrise. 2 weeks later, I saw a clip of me crying in a promotional reel. They blurred my face, but anyone who knew me knew." Ranger shifted under the table and pressed his shoulder against Graham's leg. Maribel noticed. "That dog was Owen's, wasn't he?" Graham stilled. "You knew Owen? He warned me about them." Her voice lowered. "Said they didn't want to help veterans. They wanted access to them." Outside, the diner windows reflected the last pink light over the snow. Graham looked at Tessa, then at Maribel, then down at Ranger. For the first time, The pain in his chest widened beyond Vivian. This was no longer about who she had loved behind his back. It was about who she had been willing to use in front of the world. That evening, Vivian called. Her voice was soft, almost relieved. "Tomorrow night is important. Please just read the speech we prepared. After the wedding, everything will make sense." Graham looked at the printed speech on his passenger seat. "Love gave me a second life." He folded it once, carefully, and placed it beside Owen's copied notebook page. "I'll be there," he said. Then he ended the call before she could tell him who he was supposed to be. The rehearsal dinner took place in a glass-walled restaurant overlooking the frozen lake. From outside, it looked almost holy. Warm light spilled across the snow. White flowers climbed the beams near the entrance. Guests arrived in wool coats and polished shoes, laughing carefully as if joy itself had been scheduled for 7 o'clock. Graham stood in the parking lot for a moment before going in. Ranger waited beside him, the repaired bandage on his front leg hidden beneath winter shadow. The shepherd did not pull toward the door. He simply stood shoulder to knee with Graham, steady as a second heartbeat. Inside, Vivian had built a perfect room. Candles floated in glass bowls. Evergreen branches lined the long tables. Donor packets sat beside name cards written in gold ink. Every detail looked soft, generous, expensive. Vivian crossed the room the moment she saw him. She wore a cream satin dress and pearl earrings, her hair pinned loosely at one side. To anyone else, she looked like a bride glowing with nerves. To Graham, she looked like a woman watching a stagehand step out of place. "You brought him," she said, smiling for the guests nearby. "He stays with me tonight." Her smile held, but her eyes tightened. "Of course. He's part of the story now, isn't he?" Graham did not answer. Mason Vale appeared near the bar, dressed in a charcoal suit with no tie, black signet ring flashing when he lifted his glass. He moved through the room like a man who already owned the air. When he reached Graham, he looked at Ranger first, then at him. "Big night," Mason said. "Keep it simple, heartfelt. Donors love honest restraint." Ranger rose slightly on his paws. Mason noticed and laughed under his breath. "Still judging me, buddy?" "He's usually right," Graham said. For the first time, Mason's smile came late. Dinner began with soft music and polished speeches. Vivian thanked friends, family, supporters, and everyone who believes healing can become a movement. People nodded. Glasses lifted. Cameras from the event team captured the room from flattering angles. Graham watched the lenses more than the speeches. Across the room, Tessa Monroe sat alone near the back, not hiding, not participating. She had no recorder visible, only a notebook beside her water glass. Harlan stood near the exit in his cleanest work jacket, looking deeply uncomfortable among the candles. Deputy Cole Renner was not inside, but Graham knew he was parked across the street, waiting, because Graham had asked him to stay close without making a scene. That mattered. For once, Graham was not acting alone. When Vivian rose to introduce him, the room quieted. "My future husband," she said, voice tender enough to make several guests smile, "has taught me that courage is not only what happens on a battlefield. Sometimes courage is letting yourself be loved back to life." Applause filled the room. Graham felt the sentence land on him like a coat he had not chosen. Vivian turned, offering him the printed speech. He took it. The paper was thick, expensive, folded once. "Love gave me a second life." He stared at the first line, then at the faces, waiting for him to become what the room had been promised. Ranger shifted beside his chair, not growling, not warning, just standing. Graham folded the speech closed. "I'm not going to read this," he said. The room changed before anyone moved. Vivian's smile stayed in place for 1 second too long. Graham looked at the guests, then at the donor packets beside their plates. His voice was low, but the microphone carried it cleanly. I was asked to speak tonight about healing, about what it means to come back from the dark. I believe in that work. I believe some people in this room truly want to help. A few heads turned toward Vivian. But healing is not a product launch. It is not a camera pointed at someone's worst memory. It is not a quote written for a man before he decides whether the words are true. Mason set his glass down. Vivian stepped half a pace forward. Graham. He did not look at her. No one should have to turn their pain into proof to deserve care. No veteran, no first responder, no person who survived something heavy should be packaged for inspiration without consent. Silence spread from table to table. Graham placed the speech on the podium. I cannot represent Mercer Renewal Lodge until its work, funding, and consent practices are fully transparent. And because I will not begin a marriage by pretending otherwise, there will be no wedding tomorrow. A woman near the front covered her mouth. Someone whispered Vivian's name. Mason stood. Everyone. Graham is under enormous stress. This is a private matter being handled in public. Ranger stepped between Graham and Mason before Graham could move. He did not bark. He did not bare his teeth. He simply blocked the path. The room understood the gesture before it understood the reason. Vivian's face finally lost its softness. She walked to Graham and spoke quietly enough that only he could hear. You are destroying something that could have saved people. Graham looked at her, and for once he did not search her face for the woman he had wanted her to be. No, he said. I'm refusing to let it use them. He walked out without raising his voice. Harlan followed first, then Tessa. Ranger stayed at Graham's side, calm and certain. Outside, snow had begun to fall again. Across the street, Cole's deputy SUV idled beneath a street lamp. Down the road, Mason's black SUV pulled away from the restaurant too fast. Vivian in the passenger seat, its tires cutting fresh lines through the white. Cole lowered his window as Graham approached. You want me to follow? Graham watched the SUV turn toward the dark road that led past Silver Pine. No, he said after a moment. But let's not lose them. Mason's SUV did not race. That made it worse. It moved through the falling snow with the calm of someone who knew exactly where he was going. Cole kept 2 turns behind, headlights dimmed, while Harlan's tow truck followed farther back with Graham and Ranger inside. No one spoke for the first 5 minutes. Ranger stood, braced in the back seat, nose lifted toward the cracked window. The dog was not frantic. His stillness had changed into something older, something Graham recognized from men who had heard a distant sound and knew the night was about to turn. Cole's voice came through the phone on speaker. They're heading past the lake road. Silver Pine? Harlan asked. Not the cabin, Cole said. There's an old storage building near the boat launch. Graham looked at Ranger. The shepherd's ears sharpened at the words, and his breath fogged the glass. The storage shed sat below a line of black pines, half buried in snow, its tin roof bowed with winter weight. A single security light burned above the side door. Mason's SUV was already parked there, rear hatch open. 2 men in work coats carried cardboard file boxes toward it. Vivian stood near the door in her white coat, arms folded tight against the cold. For a moment, Graham saw the woman he had almost married standing in the snow like a ghost from the life he had just walked out of. Then Mason turned with a box in his hands, and the feeling passed. Cole stepped from his vehicle first. Evening. The 2 workers froze. Mason smiled, as if interrupted during a harmless errand. Deputy, this is private property. Then you won't mind showing me paperwork before anything leaves. Vivian came forward. Cole, this is a misunderstanding. These are Mercer Renewal Lodge materials. After what happened tonight, we thought it best to secure them. Graham stepped into the light with Ranger beside him. Vivian's face tightened. You followed us. No, Graham said. We stopped you. Ranger moved past him before anyone could answer. He crossed the hard-packed snow, not toward Mason, not toward Vivian, but to one box already loaded near the SUV hatch. He lowered his head and breathed in. Then he made a sound Graham had never heard from him before. Not a growl. Not a whine. A broken, hollow exhale. Graham felt it in his ribs. Cole held up one hand. Nobody touches that box. Mason's patience thinned. It's paperwork. Then it can wait. Cole photographed the box, the vehicle, the open shed, the footprints. He moved with slow precision, forcing the night to become procedure instead of panic. When he opened the box with gloves, the first thing visible was an old gray wool blanket. Ranger stepped forward and pressed his nose to it. In one corner, stitched in faded thread, were the initials O.K. Owen Kittredge. Beneath the blanket were folders, consent forms, handwritten complaints, and a small digital recorder sealed in a plastic bag. Graham did not reach for any of it. He watched Cole's jaw harden as he read the labels. Silver Pine participant contacts, incident notes, Kittredge objection file. Vivian whispered. That was supposed to be archived. Harlan gave a bitter laugh. Funny place to archive something. Back of a car in a snowstorm. Cole looked at Mason. Start explaining. Mason's smile disappeared completely. Owen was confused near the end. He didn't understand expansion. He thought small meant pure. He thought consent meant consent, Graham said. Vivian turned toward him. We were trying to build something bigger than one cabin. Ranger remained over the blanket, body low, as if guarding a grave. Cole removed the digital recorder. This belonged to Owen? Vivian did not answer. One of the workers shifted. Mr. Vale said the old man had no family coming for this stuff. Mason snapped. Shut up. The word cracked the night open. Cole's eyes moved to the worker. You're going to want to keep talking. The worker swallowed. We were just hired to move boxes. Same as the dog. Graham went still. What dog? Cole asked. The man looked at Ranger and then away. That one. Mr. Vale said take him off the property. Said he kept coming back to the cabin. Ranger lifted his head at the sound of Mason's voice. Mason raised both hands. Nobody hurt the animal. I paid someone to relocate him. You dumped him on an icy road, Graham said. I didn't dump him anywhere. No, Harlan said quietly. You paid someone else to make your conscience lighter. Vivian began to cry then, but the tears looked more frightened than sorry. It was all moving too fast, she said. Owen was going to ruin it. He was calling donors, telling them we were stealing his people. His people? Graham repeated. The group, she said quickly. His list, his contacts. Cole played the recorder. Static hissed first. Then Owen's voice came through, thin and strained. This is Owen Kittredge. I'm at Silver Pine. I fell by the lower trail. I need help. Mason, if you get this, call rescue. Please. Rangers with me. Don't let them take the files. The recording stopped. The shed seemed to lose all air. Vivian covered her mouth. Mason looked away. Cole's voice turned flat. When was this? No one answered. Graham looked at Vivian. You knew. She shook her head once, then stopped herself. Mason got the call, she whispered. He said Owen was being dramatic. He said if emergency crews came, the transfer would be questioned before the donor weekend. Harlan closed his eyes. So you waited, Graham said. Vivian's face crumpled. We thought he would make it back inside. We thought... No, Graham said. His voice was quiet enough to frighten even himself. You thought the project mattered more than the man. Ranger stepped away from the blanket and came to Graham's side, but his eyes stayed on Vivian and Mason. There was no rage in the dog's face, only recognition, the kind that did not forgive. Cole called it in. More lights appeared through the snow 15 minutes later. The workers sat apart. Mason stopped talking. Vivian stood under the security light, white coat speckled with snow, no longer looking like a bride or a visionary, just a woman who had mistaken ambition for mercy. When Nora Kittredge arrived, she came in an old gray parka, small against the weather, her scarf red as a wound against the snow. She stepped from Tessa's car and saw Ranger before she saw anyone else. "Ranger?" she breathed. The shepherd froze. Then he crossed the snow slowly and placed his head into her trembling hands. Nora broke at once, folding over him, as if some living piece of her brother had finally come home. "Owen looked for you," she whispered. "Oh boy, he looked for you." Graham turned away, not because he could not bear the grief, but because it deserved privacy. Behind him, Cole sealed the recorder as evidence. In front of him, Ranger stood between the living and the dead, carrying a loyalty no document could fake. And Graham understood that tonight had never been about saving a wedding. It had been about keeping one last promise for a man who had been left in the snow. Morning came without music. The lake was still frozen. The chairs were still lined beneath the lodge windows. White flowers still curved around the wooden arch where Graham had been meant to stand and promise his life to Vivian Mercer. Snow had stopped during the night, leaving the world bright enough to hurt. Guests gathered in coats and silence, not knowing where to put their hands or their sympathy. Some had already heard pieces. Others had only seen police lights near the storage shed and Mason Vale leaving in the back of a deputy's vehicle. Graham stood at the front of the room without a suit jacket, wearing his old canvas coat over a white shirt that had never made it to the altar. Ranger sat at his left side, not in front of him, not guarding the doorway, just beside him. That felt important. Tessa stood near the back with her notebook closed for once. Harlan leaned against a beam, arms crossed, his eyes red from lack of sleep. Dr. Leona Briggs had come quietly and taken a seat near Maribel Shaw, who kept her paracord bracelet wrapped in one hand like a small anchor. Deputy Cole Renner spoke first, brief and careful. Evidence connected to Silver Pine had been secured. Statements would be taken. Mercer Renewal Lodge activity would be suspended, pending review. Anyone who had signed releases, donated funds, or been contacted by the project would receive information about how to report concerns. It was not dramatic. That made it feel real. Then Graham stepped forward. "I'm sorry," he said. The room went still. "Some of you came here to celebrate a wedding. Some of you came because you believed a good thing was being built. I believed that too, or I wanted to." He looked at the donor packets stacked untouched on a side table. "My name was used in ways I did not fully understand, but I should have asked harder questions before letting that name open doors. If anyone here was contacted because of my story, or trusted this project because of me, I am sorry." No one applauded. He was grateful for that. Applause would have turned it into another performance. Vivian entered before he finished stepping away from the microphone. She had no coat on, only the cream dress from the night before under a gray shawl someone must have given her. Her face looked smaller, without certainty. For a second, Graham saw not a villain, not a bride, but a woman, standing in the ruins of the story she had told herself. "Graham," she said softly. "Can we talk?" He nodded and walked with her to the far side of the room, near the windows where the lake shone white and merciless. Vivian folded her arms around herself. "I never wanted Owen to die. I know." The answer seemed to hurt her more than anger would have. "I wanted to build something that mattered. I wanted your life to mean more than what happened to you." Graham looked at her then. "That was never yours to decide." Her mouth trembled. "I loved you. Maybe you loved the man you thought you could turn me into." She closed her eyes. He did not say it cruelly. He said it because cruelty would have been easier than truth. Behind him, Ranger rose and crossed the room. He did not growl at Vivian. He only stood by Graham's knee, calm, present, choosing without drama. Vivian looked down at the dog and gave a broken laugh. He really did ruin everything. Graham shook his head. "No, He stopped me from disappearing inside it. After that, there was nothing left to say. By noon, the flowers were being taken down. Nora Kittredge arrived with a small cardboard box of Owen's belongings: a scarf, a worn fishing knife, a dented thermos, and Ranger's old brush. She stood outside near the lodge steps, small in her gray parka, the red scarf at her neck bright against all that white. Ranger recognized the box before Graham did. He lowered his head to it, sniffed once, and sat. Nora's eyes filled, but she smiled through it. "Owen used to say Ranger didn't follow commands," she said. "He followed promises." Graham knelt beside the dog. "I don't want to take what's left of your brother." Nora shook her head. "You wouldn't be. Ranger already chose where he needs to stand next." She handed Graham the old brush. "He lost Owen. Then he lost the cabin. Then they tried to throw him away because he kept remembering. Don't make him start over alone." Graham could not answer at first. Ranger leaned his weight into him, heavy and certain, so Graham put one hand on the dog's neck and nodded. A week later, Silver Pine did not reopen as a retreat. There were no banners, no cameras, no donor stage, no promise of rebirth by Sunday afternoon. Harlan repaired the porch. Cole helped sort what could legally be returned. Tessa kept digging, but she stopped taking notes whenever someone's grief became too private. Leona agreed to guide one small monthly gathering, only for adults who chose to come, with clear rules. No filming, no forced stories, no healing sold as proof. Graham's job was simple. He split firewood, checked the road, made coffee strong enough to offend everyone, sat near the door because some people needed to see the exit before they could enter the room. On the first morning, he found Ranger on the porch beside the old metal bowl. Graham had repaired the dog's collar with a strip of olive paracord. The scratched tag still read Ranger. Nora's red thread remained stitched beneath it. The lake below Silver Pine held the sunrise in a thin line of gold. Graham took the brass compass from his pocket. The needle trembled, then settled. For years, he had thought peace would arrive as a place where nothing hurt. Now he understood it differently. Peace was a road you chose after the truth hurt, and you kept walking anyway. He looked down at Ranger. "No one uses their pain to sell tickets here," he said. Ranger gave one low bark, not a warning this time. An answer. Together, they stepped off the porch and into the snow, leaving two sets of tracks toward the trees, neither one alone. Sometimes, the life we planned has to fall apart, so the life God is protecting us for can finally begin. Graham lost a wedding, but he did not lose himself. He lost a promise built on lies, but he found a quieter kind of grace, the truth, a loyal friend, and the courage to walk away before his pain became someone else's profit. Maybe that is one of life's smallest miracles. Not always being saved from heartbreak, but being guided through it before it destroys who we are. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been protected by a truth that hurt at first? Subscribe for more stories of loyalty, courage, and hope. May peace find you where you are, and may God give you the strength to choose what is honest, even when it is hard.